You really think you deserve that money? My mom said, loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like he'd already won. You'll sign it over eventually, he added, almost casually. I didn't respond. I just sat there, hands folded, heart steady. Because I already knew something they didn't. The judge adjusted his glasses and reached for the final page. My name is Danielle Harper, and I'm 34 years old. And that moment? That wasn't the beginning of the story. That was the moment everything they built against me started to fall apart. I wasn't rich. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the kind of person people bragged about at family dinners. I worked as a paralegal at a small law firm downtown. Nothing glamorous. Just long hours, careful work, and a paycheck that covered rent, bills, and a little bit of peace. In my family, that made me invisible. My younger brother, Eric? He was the one they always praised. The one with potential. The one who jumped from idea to idea while my parents funded every new attempt like it was guaranteed to succeed. Me? I was safe. You always play it too small, Danielle, my mom used to say. At least your brother takes risks, my dad would add. I stopped arguing years ago. Because arguing never changed anything. I just built my life quietly. Paid off my student loans on my own. Found a small apartment I could afford. Learned how to rely on myself instead of waiting for approval that never came. And honestly, I made peace with being the one they overlooked. Until my grandmother passed away. She was the only one in the family who ever really saw me. Not the version of me they dismissed, but the one I actually was. Careful. Observant. Strong in ways that didn't make noise. At her funeral, while everyone else was focused on appearances and sympathy hugs, I noticed something. She had looked at me differently in her final weeks. Like she was trying to tell me something, without saying it out loud. I didn't understand it then. But a week later, I got the call. Her lawyer asked me to come in. I remember sitting in that quiet office, hands resting on my lap, thinking it was just routine paperwork. Then he slid the document across the table. You should read this carefully, he said. And when I did, I felt my entire world shift. My grandmother had left me a trust. $250,000. Not split. Not shared. Mine. I actually laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make sense. Me? The one they always overlooked? The lawyer must have noticed my expression because he said, your grandmother was very clear. She believed in you. I didn't cry in that office. But something inside me settled. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen. Not by chance. Not by obligation. But intentionally. And I made a decision right there. I wasn't going to tell my family immediately. Not because I wanted to hide it. But because I wanted one thing that belonged to me, without commentary, without judgment, without them trying to reshape it into something else. For a few days, it was peaceful. I went to work. Came home. Sat with the reality of it. I even started thinking about what I could do with the money. Nothing extravagant. Just freedom. Less pressure. More options. A future that felt a little more open. And then my phone buzzed. A message from my dad. Family dinner. Tonight. Be there. No warmth. No context. Just expectation. I stared at the screen for a second, already feeling that familiar weight settle in my chest. Something told me this wasn't just dinner. Still, I went. Because part of me hoped I was wrong. When I walked into their house, everything felt normal at first. My mom was setting the table. Eric was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. My dad nodded at me like I was a guest, not his daughter. Sit, my mom said. No hug. No smile. Just instructions. I took my seat. Dinner started quietly. Too quietly. No small talk. No casual conversation. Just the sound of utensils against plates. And then my dad cleared his throat. That's when I knew. This wasn't a dinner. This was something else. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. We need to talk about your grandmother's trust, he said. And just like that, the peace I had felt for those few days, it disappeared. Like it had never existed at all. I looked up slowly. What about it? My mom didn't even look at me when she spoke. It's not fair, she said flatly. I felt my grip tighten slightly under the table. Not fair. I repeated. Eric finally looked up from his phone, watching me now. My dad nodded. That money should have been handled differently. I let out a small breath. There it was. Not congratulations. Not support. Not even curiosity. Just entitlement. And something told me. This conversation was only the beginning. I remember sitting there, staring at my plate for a second, like maybe if I just stayed quiet long enough, this conversation would pass. It didn't. My mom finally looked up at me, her expression tight, controlled. Your brother needs that money more than you do. There it was. Clear. Direct. No hesitation. I blinked once. Needs it for what? Eric leaned back in his chair, like this was already settled. I've got plans, Danielle. Real ones. Business stuff. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because I'd heard it before. Different idea. Same tone. Same confidence. Same outcome. You mean like the last three? I asked quietly. The air shifted instantly. My dad's voice sharpened. This isn't a joke. I'm not joking, I said, finally looking at all of them. I'm asking a real question. My mom put her fork down a little too hard. Why are you being difficult? That word. Difficult. It always showed up the moment I didn't agree. I took a slow breath. I'm not being difficult. I'm just confused. Grandma made her decision. My dad shook his head. She was old, Danielle. People influence decisions at that age. And there it was. The accusation. Subtle, but not really. I felt something tighten in my chest. Are you saying I manipulated her? Silence. Not denial. Just silence. Eric shifted in his seat, not quite meeting my eyes. Look, no one's saying that exactly, but... But what? I cut in, softer than expected. He sighed. But it doesn't make sense. You got everything. I got nothing. I leaned back slightly, studying him. For a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered all the times my parents funded his fresh starts. The car they bought him. The rent they covered. The chances they kept giving him. And I realized. This wasn't about fairness. This was about expectation. I was expected to give. He was expected to receive. My mom folded her hands together. We're not asking for all of it. That surprised me. Just most, she added. Of course. My dad leaned forward again. We can handle this as a family. No need to make it complicated. I felt something settle inside me. A kind of calm. The kind that shows up when you finally see things clearly. No, I said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just firm. 3 faces stared back at me. What do you mean, no? My mom asked. I mean no, I repeated. Grandma made her decision. I'm respecting it. My dad's jaw tightened. You're being selfish. There it was again. A different word. Same meaning. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. If respecting her wishes makes me selfish, then I guess that's what I am. Sit down, he snapped. I didn't. I'm not discussing this anymore, I said. And then I walked out. No one followed me. No one called after me. That should have told me everything. But somehow, it still hurt. The next morning, I tried to go back to normal. Work. Emails. Documents. Deadlines. I told myself it was over. That they'd be angry for a while, maybe cold, maybe distant. But eventually, they'd move on. Families fight. Families recover. Right? Around 10:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something made me answer. Hello. Danielle Harper. Yes. This is a process server. I have legal documents for you. I felt my stomach drop. I'm at your office, he added. For a second, I couldn't move. Then everything inside me went, very still. I'll come down, I said. The walk to the lobby felt longer than it should have. Each step heavier than the last. And when I saw him, envelope in hand, neutral expression, I already knew. I signed. Took the envelope. Waited until he left before opening it. My hands didn't even shake. Not yet. But my chest felt tight. Like something was pressing down from the inside. I unfolded the papers slowly. And there it was. My parents' names. Filed against me. A formal claim. They were accusing me of influencing my grandmother's decision, of taking advantage of her, of securing the trust unfairly. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it. But because I couldn't believe it. They weren't just asking anymore. They weren't just pressuring me at the dinner table. They had taken it to court. My own parents. Suing me. I let out a quiet breath, staring down at the page. And for the first time since all of this started, the hurt shifted into something else. Something sharper. More focused. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't emotion. This was strategy. They thought I would fold. That I would panic. That I would give in just to make it stop. I closed the envelope carefully. Not rushed. Not shaken. Just deliberate. Because what they didn't understand yet was that I worked in law. I'd seen cases like this before. And as I replayed everything in my head, the dinner, the wording, the accusations, I noticed something. Something small. But critical. Something missing from their entire argument. And the moment it clicked, I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt ready. Because if they wanted to take this to court, then they had just made the biggest mistake they could possibly make. I didn't cry. That's the part that surprised me the most. Standing there in the lobby, holding those papers, I expected to feel overwhelmed. Betrayed. Maybe even broken. But instead, I felt clear. Like something inside me had finally snapped into place. Because this wasn't emotional anymore. This was legal. And legal. I understood. By the time I got back to my desk, I had already read through the claim 4 times. Line by line. Word by word. Not as a daughter. But as a paralegal. They were arguing that I had unduly influenced my grandmother. That I had isolated her. Manipulated her. Positioned myself to benefit. It sounded convincing. On the surface. But the deeper I looked, the more cracks I saw. I pulled up similar case files from our system. Compared language. Reviewed outcomes. And that's when it hit me. They were missing something. Not just a small detail. Something essential. I leaned back in my chair slowly, staring at the screen. Because if I was right, this entire case could collapse. The days that followed were strange. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet in a way that felt intentional. My family didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't try to talk it out again. Because now, they didn't need to. They had made their move. And they believed it was enough. A week later, I found out just how far they had gone. I walked into work that morning like any other day, coffee in hand, already running through my tasks. But the moment I stepped into the office, I felt it. That shift. The subtle change in energy. 2 coworkers stopped talking when I passed. Another gave me a quick, awkward smile. I frowned slightly, heading to my desk. "Hey," Jenna whispered as I sat down. "Are you okay?" I blinked. "Yeah, why?" She hesitated. That was all it took. "What?" I asked. She leaned in closer. "Someone called yesterday. Asking about you." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "They said they were looking into your conduct, something about a legal issue involving your family." I went very still. Of course they did. Of course they didn't stop at court. Who did they talk to? I asked. "Mostly HR," she said carefully. "But people heard." I nodded once. Slowly. "Thanks for telling me." She squeezed my arm gently. "It doesn't sound like you." I gave her a small smile. "It's not." But the damage? It was already done. That was the second move. Not just legal pressure. Reputation. They wanted to make me look guilty, before anything was even decided. And the worst part? It worked. Not completely. But enough. People looked at me differently that day. More cautious. More curious. Like they were trying to figure out if the version of me they knew was real. I kept my head down. Did my work. Answered questions when needed. But inside? Something hardened. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. And they were willing to take everything from me to get it. A few days later, the third move came. Eric. He texted me. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. Then, against my better judgment, I replied. We met at a small cafe halfway between our places. Neutral ground. Or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. He was already there when I arrived, tapping his fingers against the table like he was impatient. Hey, he said. Hey. I sat down across from him, studying his face. He didn't look angry. He looked confident. That should have been my first warning. I'll get straight to it, he said. This doesn't have to get messy. I almost laughed. Too late for that. He ignored it. Drop the fight, he continued. Sign it over. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of. Like I was a responsibility. Not a person. I tilted my head slightly. How generous. I'm serious, Danielle, he said, leaning forward. You don't have the resources to win this. I held his gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't react. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. It's what I know, he said. Dad's already talked to people. This is bigger than you realize. I sat back slowly. And for a second, I saw it clearly. They weren't just confident. They were sure. Sure I would break. Sure I would give in. Sure I didn't have anything they needed to worry about. And that was their biggest mistake. I stood up, reaching for my bag. That's your final offer? I asked. He nodded. Good, I said. He frowned slightly. Good. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this started. And I felt nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. No need to explain myself. Because now I know exactly where we stand, I said. Then I turned and walked away. That night, I sat at my desk, the trust documents spread out in front of me. Every page. Every signature. Every clause. And then, I found it again. The detail they had overlooked. The one thing they never thought to check. I traced my finger along the line slowly, reading it one more time. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be absolutely sure. And when I finished, a small smile formed on my lips. Because what they didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I wasn't just prepared to defend myself. I had something they couldn't fight. Something they couldn't twist. Something that would end this. The moment the right person read it. And they were about to find out, the hard way. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was stressed, but because my mind wouldn't stop, connecting everything. Every conversation. Every document. Every assumption they had made about me. It all started to feel predictable. The next morning, I got to work earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because I needed quiet. I spread the trust documents across my desk again, smoothing out each page carefully. Most people would have focused on the obvious parts, the amount, the beneficiaries, the signatures. But I wasn't most people. I knew where to look. Because I'd seen something like this before. Not exactly the same, but close enough. What they didn't know was, I'd helped prepare documents like this for years. I whispered it under my breath, almost like I was reminding myself. My grandmother hadn't just been careful. She had been intentional. And that meant something. I pulled up old files from the firm's database, similar trusts, similar clauses, similar disputes. Patterns started forming. Clear ones. The kind you don't notice unless you've been trained to see them. And then, there it was again. That final page. The one they didn't mention. The one their entire case seemed to ignore. I picked it up slowly. Read it line by line. Every word felt heavier now. More important. Because it wasn't just a signature page. It was a safeguard. A final instruction. And most people? They would have skimmed it. Or assumed it was standard. But it wasn't. Not even close. I had a plan they never saw coming. The thought settled in quietly. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Just certain. Because if this page meant what I believed it meant, then their entire argument didn't just weaken. It disappeared. Still, I didn't rush. That was the difference between reacting and preparing. I made copies, highlighted key lines, cross-referenced clauses with existing legal standards. I wanted everything airtight. Not just convincing. Undeniable. Later that afternoon, I walked into my mentor's office. He looked up from his desk, already reading my expression. "You found something," he said. Not a question. A statement. I nodded, closing the door behind me. "Take a look at this." I handed him the page. Watched his eyes move across the text. Once. Then again. Slower. More focused. And then, he leaned back. A small, impressed smile forming. "Well," he said, tapping the paper lightly, "this changes everything." I exhaled, not even realizing I'd been holding my breath. "So I'm not crazy," I said. "Not even close," he replied. "This is very deliberate." I sat down across from him. "They didn't mention it at all in their filing." "Of course they didn't," he said calmly. "Because if they had, they wouldn't have a case." That sent a quiet wave of relief through me. But also something else. Something sharper. Because it confirmed what I had already started to suspect. "They didn't check properly," I said. My mentor shook his head slightly. "No, they underestimated you." That word again. Underestimated. It followed me my entire life. But this time, it worked in my favor. "So what happens now?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands. "Now," he said. "Now you let them keep going." I frowned. "You don't think I should bring it up early?" "No," he said firmly. "You wait." "Why?" "Because right now, they are confident," he explained. "They think they've already won. And people like that? They get careless." I considered that. It made sense. "They've already exposed their entire strategy," he continued. "Let them commit to it. Fully." "And then?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Then you show them what they missed." I left his office feeling different. Not lighter. Not relaxed. But steady. Like everything had shifted from chaos to control. Meanwhile, my family? They were moving in the opposite direction. More confident. More vocal. More certain. I started hearing things. Through relatives. Through mutual contacts. Even through people at work. "They said you're going to settle soon. They think you won't risk going to trial. They're already talking about how the money will be used." I didn't respond to any of it. Didn't correct anyone. Didn't defend myself. Because I didn't need to. One evening, my aunt called me. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. "Danielle," she said, her voice tight, "you should really reconsider what you're doing." I closed my eyes for a second. "What do you think I'm doing?" "Dragging this out," she replied. "It's making the whole family look bad." I let out a small breath. "Interesting," I said. "That's what you think this is about?" She hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. "You're going to regret this," she added quietly. I opened my eyes again. Stared at the documents on my desk. "No," I said. "I don't think I will." After I hung up, I sat there in silence. Not angry. Not hurt. Just aware. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't trying to be understood. I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I was just waiting. And as the court date got closer, the tension built. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Like pressure rising beneath the surface. Because they believed they had already won. They were already celebrating. Already planning. Already dividing something that was never theirs to begin with. And me? I was preparing for one moment. One page. One decision. That would change everything. And the best part? They still had no idea it existed. The morning of the hearing felt strangely calm. Not quiet in the outside world. Cars passing, people talking, the usual noise of a weekday. But inside me? Everything was still. No panic. No second guessing. Just focus. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw them immediately. My parents sat together, close, like a united front. Eric was next to them, leaning back with that same relaxed confidence I'd seen at the cafe. Like this was already over. Like they were just waiting for it to be made official. For a brief second, my mom's eyes met mine. No warmth. No hesitation. Just certainty. I looked away first. Not because I felt smaller, but because I didn't need to prove anything in that moment. I took my seat quietly, placing my folder on the table in front of me. Everything I needed was inside. Organized. Prepared. Ready. My mentor sat a few rows behind me, not involved directly, but present. A quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. The hearing began. Formal. Structured. Predictable. Their lawyer stood first. Confident. Polished. He laid out their argument clearly, too clearly. It almost sounded rehearsed. Like a story they had told themselves enough times that they believed it completely. Your Honor, he began, this case concerns undue influence over a vulnerable individual. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I just listened. Because every word he said, it followed the exact pattern I expected. Every claim. Every angle. Every assumption. They had built their case on one thing. That I was weaker than them. Less experienced. Less capable. Easier to pressure. He spoke for several minutes, painting me as calculated, manipulative, opportunistic. Each sentence designed to chip away at my credibility. I could feel the weight of it in the room. The subtle shift in attention. People leaning in. Listening. Judging. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just steady. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm, I'd like to address the claims made against me. I didn't try to overpower their argument. I didn't try to match their intensity. I did something simpler. I told the truth. Clearly. Directly. Without emotion clouding it. I explained my relationship with my grandmother. Her independence. Her clarity. Her decisions. I walked through the timeline. The documentation. The process. Everything that led to the creation of the trust. And as I spoke, something shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Because facts have a way of cutting through noise. Their lawyer interrupted once. Tried to redirect. But I stayed grounded. Focused. Because I knew. This wasn't the moment yet. Finally, I paused. Just for a second. Then I reached into my folder. Pulled out a single document. The final page. The one they never mentioned. Your Honor, I said, holding it carefully, there's one more piece of documentation I'd like the court to review. Their lawyer frowned slightly. My dad leaned forward. My mom's expression tightened. Eric stopped moving entirely. I handed the document to the clerk. Watched as it made its way to the judge. And then, I waited. The room felt different now. Quieter. Tighter. Like something unseen had just entered the space. The judge adjusted his glasses. Looked down at the page. Read silently at first. Then again. Slower. More carefully. And that's when it happened. That small pause. The kind that doesn't seem like much. Unless you know exactly what it means. What is this? The judge asked. Not confused. Not dismissive. But interested. I took a breath. This is the final signed page of the trust, Your Honor. Their lawyer stepped forward slightly. We've already reviewed. No, the judge said, without looking up. You haven't. That was the moment. The exact moment everything changed. He began reading aloud. Carefully. Clearly. Every word landing heavier than the last. A clause. Specific. Deliberate. Impossible to misinterpret. A non-contestation clause. Stating that any party who challenged the trust, without valid legal grounds, would forfeit any claim entirely. No partial access. No redistribution. Nothing. Silence filled the courtroom. Real silence. Not the kind where people are waiting to speak. The kind where no one knows what to say. I didn't look at my parents right away. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The shift. The realization. The collapse of everything they thought they had built. Their lawyer tried to recover. Started speaking quickly. But it didn't matter. Because the foundation of their case was gone. The judge closed the document slowly. Looked up. And for the first time since the hearing began, his attention was fully on them. "This changes the nature of this case entirely," he said. And in that moment, the confidence they walked in with disappeared. No one spoke. Not my dad. Not my mom. Not even Eric. That silence, it wasn't just shock. It was realization. The kind that hits when there's nothing left to argue. The judge set the paper down carefully, like it carried weight beyond ink and signatures. "Given this clause," he said, calm but firm, "the court finds no basis to proceed with the claim as presented." Their lawyer tried one last time. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not," the judge cut in. That was it. No long debate. No dramatic back and forth. Just, done. "And furthermore," the judge continued, glancing back at the document, "the act of contesting this trust under these terms may result in forfeiture of any potential interest." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Not loud. But noticeable. Because everyone understood what that meant. I finally looked at them. Really looked. My dad's face had gone pale. My mom's lips were pressed so tightly together they'd lost color. Eric? He looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under him. For the first time since this started, they weren't in control. The judge turned his attention back to me. "Miss Harper, based on the documentation and the clause provided, this case is dismissed." Dismissed. One word. That's all it took. "And legal costs," he added, glancing toward their side, "will be the responsibility of the plaintiffs." Another shift. Sharper this time. Because now, they weren't just walking away empty-handed. They were paying for it. The sound of the gavel wasn't loud. But it echoed. At least, it felt like it did. Because in that moment, everything they had tried to take from me fell apart. I gathered my papers slowly. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just, finished. As I turned to leave, my mom's voice finally broke through. "Danielle, wait." I stopped. Just for a second. Not because I needed to. But because I wanted to hear what came next. "We didn't know," she said. I almost smiled. Not out of amusement. But because of how familiar that sounded. "You should have," I replied calmly. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. Because there was nothing left to explain. My dad stepped forward slightly. "We can fix this." Fix. Another word that used to mean something. Now? It didn't. "No," I said. Soft. Final. And then I walked away. No one followed me this time either. But it felt different. Not like distance. Like consequence. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect. But because something heavy was finally gone. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But permanently. My phone stayed quiet. No more demands. No more pressure. No more expectations. I heard through relatives that things weren't going well for them. Legal costs. Tension. Arguments. But I didn't involve myself. Because I wasn't part of that anymore. I focused on my life. My work. My future. I used part of the trust carefully. Paid down what little debt I had left. Started planning something bigger. Not to prove them wrong. But to build something right. For me. And for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel overlooked. I didn't feel less than. I didn't feel like I had to earn my place. Because I already had it. I just stopped asking them to see it. If your family ever tried to control you through money, or made you feel like what's yours somehow belongs to them, you know exactly how this feels. Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground like this, and refuse to be pushed aside. And click hype to help this reach someone who needs the reminder that they are allowed to choose themselves. Did this story hit home? Let me know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Click hype to help this story find others who felt the same way. Your support makes a huge difference.